Good. Welcome, Tanya.
Sorry. Hi.
Okay, well, I guess we can kick this off. Brandon, would you mind reading our remote meeting statement?
Yes. And this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I want to provide a few reminders to ensure that provisions of the Kansas Open Meetings Act are satisfied while meeting in this hybrid format. Board members and other meeting participants must state their names and titles each time they speak. Various members of city staff are present via Zoom and in-person attendance. They must also state their names and titles each time we speak. All motions need to be stated clearly, and after a motion is made and seconded, the chair will call on board members individually to provide their vote. The chair will then announce whether or not the motion carried, as well as a count of the vote. And the agenda for this evening's meeting provided instructions on how to submit public comment and how it will be handled during the meeting. We did not receive any written public comment or requests for in-person public comment this evening, but if we do have anybody join us by Zoom or in-person attendance, then we will be sure to note that for you, Madam Chair. The chair will call for in-person public comment if anybody is available, and staff will direct individuals to the podium to speak following social distancing and safety protocols, which should be addressed in the agenda. And finally, I want to remind everyone to please mute yourselves when you're not speaking. Thank you.
All right, this is Chair Robinson. Would it be appropriate for me to just skip over reading the public comment for tonight since there's no one present? Okay. All right. So let's start with item A, approving our minutes from January 13th. Looks like there's no link to the minutes at this time, but we can still approve them.
Actually, Madam Chair, Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, we had the minutes were submitted late, and I did not want to put the board members under a time crunch to have to read those on short notice in advance of the meeting. And so I would recommend just taking no action on this item, and we will have those minutes available at the next meeting.
All right. That sounds good. This is Chair Robinson, so we will approve the January meeting minutes at our next meeting. So going on and moving on to our agenda items, we can go ahead and start with the strategic plan presentation from our city manager, Craig Owens. I think we've had the pleasure of meeting with. Hi, Craig. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Good evening, City Manager Craig Owens. Thank you so much for making some time for me. It's a real pleasure to visit with you tonight. I am making my way around to our several boards and commissions to share the strategic plan. We have about, I think, 47 boards and commissions, so I'm not getting around to all of them, but there are several that we did think it was really important that we kind of share the background on the strategic plan, and it's aligning all the work that we're doing as a community, as a city, and it sets our priorities and a number of other things. So felt like it was useful, and so far in my visits, it's been a good conversation just to make sure that everybody understood kind of where we're headed and how did this plan come together. So thanks for giving me a little bit of time tonight. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, and then I'll really look forward to any questions or comments that you have after I get through it. So this is really the second strategic plan that the community has had. The first strategic plan was kind of that blueprint poster that you saw in a lot of the rooms at City Hall. And it was done a few years ago, and really was a good starter for having strategic planning kind of being familiarized in the community, the organization. It set out some priorities. It recognized and kind of communicated that difficult things take a lot of time to do, and you have to sometimes, when these are big picture items, then you need to bite them off in chunks, and that's kind of what the strategic plan did, that initial one. It was mainly built by the governing body of the city, along with some staff interaction, and it really set, these are some new things that we'd like to accomplish and set those out there. It did have some limitations. It didn't undertake to articulate all of the priorities. It kind of laid new priorities on top of the things that we were already doing and kind of took for granted. And it kind of couched some things that were big things and little things all together in the same context. So when we undertook a revision or a replacement of it, the next version of the strategic planning process, what we wanted to start with was a lot of engagement and community listening. And so, so we set out to do that by first I asked our folks, the team members that work for the city across all departments at different levels of the community. I said, hey, who will help us go out and listen to the community and build the strategic plan? I asked for volunteers, hoping that we get 20 so that we could really get out into the community and share that work. I had 50 people volunteer, and it was so rewarding as the new city manager that there was such a responsiveness to that. The other thing that created was, the people that work in the city are also community members, and they interact with the community in different ways in their lives and the way they live their lives. And so what it helped us is to build a listening group that already kind of was part of the community in lots of different ways, and that had access to the community in different ways than when we just plant a microphone at City Hall on a Tuesday night and say, give us your comments. So we were excited to do that. We did a training session, and we went out and sent people out to get invited to where the community was already gathering and talking about the things that were important to them. And through that process of kind of getting invited and asking to meet with community members, we had 3,000 interactions with community members. We had 3,000 community members share with us their ideas for what they'd like to see for the future of the community and what was important to them. So we assimilated that into a big data pool and kind of organized it and brought it down to 5 key outcome areas that we called them. And I'm going to share the screen here in a second and hopefully get that done. So what I'm showing you here is on our website. It is our strategic plan. And these 5 areas that we kind of organized the data that we heard, and it went into unmistakable identity, strong welcoming neighborhoods, safe and secure, prosperity and economic security, and connected city. So that's how we kind of characterize the type of services, the type of structure that the citizens asked us to do. And on each one of these, we carefully worked, and I know you all are very careful about your language in the work that you do. We worked to develop statements under each of these that would help to kind of add some flavor of what this meant, what we heard. And it was important that we really were speaking to 2 audiences primarily. One was to the team members in the organization that were going to be doing a lot of the work. We wanted to make sure that these statements really were clear, and that they would help drive and guide the work day to day, month to month, year to year that we would do. We also wanted to make sure that the people who gave us their ideas, that shared with us what they wanted for the next 3 to 5 years in their community, that they could read these statements and say, you heard me. That is what I said. That's what that characterizes what I told you I wanted. So those are 2 important audiences, and we worked very hard at building these statements. We also then understand that the best strategic plans will have measurements attached to them. And so we worked very hard to build key performance indicators into each of these. And before I go into this one, I picked safe and secure because I think that's where a lot of the work is that you're working on and aligns with a lot of the efforts of your board. But one of the things that we also believed was that let me skip back to the last page that I was on. One of the other things we believed was that what we do is important, but also how we do it. We definitely heard from this community and understand that the way we do our work is really important too. So we built these 6 commitment areas, and those are community engagement, efficient, effective processes, equity and inclusion, sound fiscal stewardship, engaged and empowered teams, and environmental sustainability. So not just what we need to do and accomplish, what we're in business to do, but how we do it is also important. And so when we built our scorecard, we put performance indicators for each of the commitment areas inside of each of the outcomes. So you'll see that intersection of what we're trying to achieve from the perspectives of and as measured by the commitment areas. And I'll give you some examples of how those are. So for instance, for community engagement, percent of residents who perceive Lawrence as a safe or very safe community. So that is a community engagement index. That's one where that's how we're going to measure success of the work that we do in safe and secure from the perspective of community engagement. And as you go through these are all on our website. And as you go through these, you'll see that each of the commitment areas is represented. And we really believe that we have to show progress and we have to balance the effort and the progress that we make against all 6 of those areas in each of the outcome areas. So this process makes it much more difficult. But we believe that by adding the commitments in there and honoring those and accounting for those is really the only way that a good strategic plan can really serve the community. And so that's how we built that. I'm going to unshare here. And so the work that we did really was to put those things together, and you'll see that we continue each of these outcome teams. Each of these outcomes and each of these commitments areas has a champion within the staff. And so there's a champion for each of these teams. Many times they're the department director that kind of you would expect to be over some of these areas, but in a lot of cases like safe and secure, you've got fire and police, and then some other community partners and other agencies and pieces of our organization will also be participating in those and do serve on the teams that do that. I see Chief Bagan has stepped in with Chief Coffey's retirement. He is standing in as the outcome champion for safe and secure, and each of the other areas has a champion for it, just like each of the commitment areas has a champion. And they serve in these teams and have built these plans. Also, then we'll be working to make sure that we make progress in them. We're in our beginning of our 2nd month of the budget, the first budget that is aligned towards this strategic plan and put resources towards accomplishing goals within the strategic plan and making progress in each of these areas. So that's an important part. We will use this as a tool. This is a community's tool. It's an organization's tool. It's our policymakers' tool to help us make progress and also make sure that we stay aligned with these areas. It's not perfect. This was a huge accomplishment to get this far. It's very complex. It tried its very hardest to try and represent all the 3,000 perspectives that we saw and heard, but it won't be perfect, and we need to make adjustments over time. And I think that's also what a characteristic of a good strategy and good strategic plan is that it contemplates that there will be some appropriate adjustments to account for things that we didn't think. So I leave that as a hint of modesty and understanding that it's not perfect in its launch. with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, any comments.
Board Member Mishra.
This is Board Member Mishra. Thank you, City Manager Owens, for sharing and talking about it. Because I had a clarification question. You talked about 3,000 interactions, and then you also talked about 3,000 individuals.
I'm really not trying to distinguish between those two. So I didn't really go too deeply into what that interaction looked like. But so we reached out. I remember you kind of outlining the groups that you reached out to with your interactions. That was a similar list to the one that we did. So there was a lot of formal institutions out there that we asked for, some access to the people that they represent, and there was a lot of informal. So we would go out to the sports pavilion and get in the way of people hurrying to their volleyball practices or whatever. We would try and intercept people at the library, and we had table out there. We did have some large gatherings. Where, like at the Carnegie Building, where we invited anybody in the community to come and share their perspectives and accounted for them there. And, we then did, I think, get invited to some community gatherings that we didn't particularly necessarily intend to get into. But as I said, we've got 50 different members of our staff that interact organically with this community in different ways. And I think they did find their way into other groups that were there. So we got lots of different ways. I personally facilitated a number of the groups that had maybe 20, 25 individuals in them. And, we do the white pad of paper and asked the questions and got all the information. We had training on how to gather that information. So that's how we kind of measured the amount of participation that we had. We did do some online surveys, and we did interact with people individually as well.
So once again, just to clarify, this is Board Member Sanjay Mishra. Clarify that the plan was built based on input from 3,000 residents.
City Manager Craig Owens, yes, it was absolutely based on and informed by that. Then obviously, the governing body as the elected leaders of the community ultimately decided these are the top priorities and where it was, but we started with the listening before we kind of narrowed it in. And obviously professional staff and other participants did as well.
Board Member Gibson.
This is Board Member Jane Gibson. Thank you for that presentation. I am wondering if you heard anybody talk about their expectations for the CPRB and what your understanding is of how the CPRB should fit into the safe and secure area. Can you talk a little about that?
City Manager Craig Owens, I don't remember anybody talking specifically about virtually any board or commission in that. And we really prompted them to talk about what they wanted for their community. So not what already existed, but what they were trying to receive, what they wanted. What were the outcomes in the prompting? So, but I don't remember anybody bringing up a specific board or commission. But I only facilitated a handful of sessions. There were lots of other people that were in that. But in the capture, kind of in the digestion, I don't remember anybody talking about that. I will say that when you look at the safe and secure and the intersection, particularly with equity and inclusion and community engagement, I do think there are some very obvious prompts for high levels of trust building and people's feeling of safety And I think you'll note that in particular, there are a number of measures throughout this that are suggesting goals of getting alignment of the all people in the community to have the same level of service and a sense of service and trust in their government that the general population does. So we, as an example, we have an ETC is a company that has worked with us to do surveys. We will be launching a community survey again this year, and it will call for the oversampling so that we, for minority groups, so that we can make sure that all people are feeling like they're getting the same level of service and have those levels. So I think those are areas where you probably, when you look at the strategic plan and the key performance indicators that are prompting a lot of our action and activity, I think that is work that probably aligns with the conversations that you all are having.
I think Board Member Littleton had her hand up as well.
This is Board Member Littleton. Well, Craig just answered the question of James that I was going to bring up. I just wanted clarity, and Craig helped on that because I figured our focus by looking at the commitments were the two things he mentioned. So he covered all that. Thank you, Craig.
Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Mishra. So City Manager Owens, do you have a feel for the relative importance of these outcome areas?
City Manager Craig Owens, it's too familiar to me that all of them are important, and I think the expectations are always put upon local government that it's all of these and more. But
okay, go ahead, finish first.
Well, so the relative importance, what we believe is that our community has asked us to do all of these things. And I don't think that they're in any particular order.
So again, may I persist just a little to ask, if we had shortage in budget, what would you cut? What would you keep? Well, first of all, we do have a shortage in the budget. We were really explicit in that, City Manager Craig Owens, we were really explicit in that with the adoption of this budget, that there are some structural gaps that we're going to have to work as a community to fill. And that necessarily will involve, again, a large community conversation. So I wouldn't presume to say right now today that there is already a predetermined order of any of these, but we will have we are working on it already. The budget's the second month in, and we've already been spending a couple of months on the budget that we'll be presenting in a few months for next year. And with that work, we will have to prioritize, and we will have to show that the prioritization is there. My expectation, and this will sound familiar to the staff members are on, my expectation is that any of that the best hope we have of prioritization is getting great alignment of everything we do with what we say are our top priorities within the strategic plan. So we had decades, if not generations, of prioritization built into our budgets, our traditional budgets, and the way we've been spending money, the way we've organized our city structures, the way that we've organized boards and commissions, the way that we've been making decisions have all been kind of built over a long period of time without a re-examination of what is it we're in business to do today, and what are the expectations of our community today and tomorrow that we're trying to build a plan for. And so I do think there is a lot of realignment of legacy investment and priorities to this plan. And as we do that, I think we will have a better shot at
really robustly funding everything that's been asked for in this plan. And then what's left is probably, or what's not accounted for is probably mostly legacy priorities that maybe are not serving the community very well.
Thank you.
Board Member Salvini.
Yes, this is Board Member Salvini. Thank you very much for your presentation, City Manager Owens. And I have a couple of questions. The first is, how do you vision the results of the study that was done by Citygate and other initiatives that law enforcement has made in terms of improvement in services to the community, coupled with possible accreditation, best practices, so on and so forth. How do you vision those fitting into the process, but particularly to our role?
City Manager Craig Owens. I think we had a lot of good fortune, good timing in that a lot of plans were being developed, significant plans were under development or were developed before we adopted the strategic plan or right after we did. So a large list of those things, the downtown plan, the Plan 2040 is relatively fresh. The pay study for employees. I'm missing an economic development plan. We brought Ernst & Young to inform that. And then, of course, Citygate and the work that it offered, or the plan recommendations it offered for policing. So the nice thing is that it all pulled that we were informed by, and it helped to build the strategic plan. And hopefully you see pieces reflected of all of those thoughtful, deeper dive specific area plans. We were able to reflect those in there. At the same time, I think the strategic plan also was reflective of the listening that we did. And I think it sets the expectation as well. So I think it's extremely consistent. We were somewhat insistent that all of these plans that already existed, all the voices that we already gathered before we initiated the strategic plan, that we could also reference those, and that wherever possible that we align those inputs with the strategic plan so there isn't confusion. We want clarity of where we're trying to go, as every strategic plan craves, clarity and alignment so that we can be efficient at going where the community has asked us to go. So to specifically, where do you all go? I would not be so presumptuous as to determine that. I'm presenting this, which is the policy direction of the City Commission, the Lawrence City Commission, and I'm presenting it to these 48 boards and commissions so that you have it as a reference and you can better determine how you can support and promote the direction that's been laid out by this plan. I hope I would rather understand and have you understand where we're trying to go and then contribute to it in that way.
This is Chair Robinson. Any other questions or comments from the board? Board Member Gibson.
This is Board Member Jane Gibson. I feel like we're asking the same question. And I wonder if it would be appropriate to ask Mr. Fagan if he would weigh in, since he's the champion for the safe and secure, if you have any thoughts about how you see the CPRB fitting into that arena.
Interim Fire Chief Tom Fagan, thanks Board Member Gibson for the question. Right now, this is a new position for me. And right now I'm listening as well. And I'm keeping good notes of these questions in this meeting today. So I think they're great questions for the city manager as we look forward to really dive into these progress indicators, these performance indicators. I would share with you that not only the police department, but fire medical, even other partnering agencies that are overarchingly involved in many of these are all looking at how they can really move the needle in each one of these progress indicators. So I think to start with, reading the plan, looking at the strategies that are identified with each one of the progress indicators, and just having a good grasp of that will help with alignment with communication channels, and either in this process or others. I think that's probably the best start.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, this is Chair Robinson. Any other comments or questions?
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, Brandon, sorry.
That's just fine. Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Just to add a little bit more information, and this is probably new information to the board members. Major Heffley, at the time previously Interim Chief Heffley, and then prior to him, Interim Chief Brixius, who's joining us. They had been working for the last several months of last year, and on a web portal, a web page that can be used as a communication tool to provide a sort of a real-time status update on where we are with each one of the 75 recommendations contained in the Citygate report. And the way that they are formatting that that web page is trying to align those recommendations with where we think they fit in the context of the city's strategic plan. And we are looking forward to being able to present that to the board soon. It has been a much more of a technical challenge to put that together than we had originally anticipated. So we have been delayed in doing that. But I think that actually, to Board Member Salvini and Gibson's questions, I think that could be a very helpful tool for the Police Review Board members to identify, what parts of those recommendations, and then again, within the context of the strategic plan, you would like to lean into with us. And it's a pretty open invitation to the board to work on any parts of those with us. So we look forward to being able to do that soon. I don't have a date for you yet, but just as soon as we're ready to even show you sort of a early draft of that website, we certainly will do that to get that conversation started.
This is Chair Robinson. I do have a quick comment, and thank you so much for your presentation, Craig. I think this is a really useful website. I love how it's broken down into measurable outcomes and steps. I think it'll be really helpful for us to work on aligning with the city on certain items. I just wanted to say that I'm really looking forward to seeing the data on the outcome in safe and secure, the variance of satisfaction with perceptions of safety by race, gender, education, and income, because we see that 82% of our citizens, perceive Lawrence as safe or very safe. But a quick Google search will show us that 75% of our citizens are white. So I think it'll be very helpful to see that data, and I think it'll be something that we'll want to stay on top of and get that information. So that'll be very helpful. So thank you. Any other comments or questions from the board? All right. Craig, thank you so much for your time tonight.
City Manager Craig Owens, thank you so much for making time for me on the agenda and for all of your tireless work in regards to this. I really do appreciate it. I know this is my first official visit, but obviously appreciate your investment that you're making in making our community better, and appreciate the time with you this evening.
All right, this is Chair Robinson. We can go ahead and move on to our second agenda item. So at our pre-meeting with Brandon and Sanjay, we had requested an update from the kind of pre-work group. So Jane, Tanya, and Stephanie are going to be in that small group to work with city staff and the chief of police to define the scope of work, purpose statement, and membership for the working group. So there's not a report ready at this time. However, Brandon, are you raising your hand? Would you like to speak to this? Oh, okay. This report can be prepared, but it's my understanding that there hasn't been a lot of time to develop any of these outcomes with this group. So if it sounds good for tonight, we just need to kind of discuss what our expectations are related to a periodic report from like the pre-work group and the work group. And Brandon, when I was kind of writing this down, I thought, well, we're not even really to the work group stage yet. So is this something that we need to discuss tonight, you think?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. So we did have a chance to meet yesterday afternoon, which was our first meeting. Chief Lockhart, board members Gibson, Salvini, and Littleton. We were able to get together and had a really productive conversation, which was far-ranging. But what we came out of it with was an idea for a draft purpose statement. I don't believe that draft purpose statement is ready to share with the board for feedback tonight, but I am going to look to the three board members maybe for their thoughts if we want to do that and go ahead and engage in that conversation. We do have 2 more meetings on our calendar already, and we would look forward to being able to have hopefully not just the purpose statement, but also proposal for scope of work and membership on the work group ready to present for feedback from the board at the next meeting. So that's the status of our work together so far.
Board Member Santos. You're muted.
Could we go back and get just a real basic review of when you say work group or whatever sub-work group, are we talking about the idea that our group is going to participate with this city staff group and that the 3 members of our current group have met with the representatives of whoever's forming that group? I'm confused as to what we're talking about.
Yeah, this is Chair Robinson. So our last couple of meetings would cover that. So, and they were pretty short meetings as well. So if you could go back and watch those, I think that would give you some background on that. But at the City Commission meeting in January, the City Commission decided that we would take the draft ordinance and have a working group composed of city staff, chief of police, community members, CPRB, to not only look at the draft ordinance, but also kind of a broader scope, which, is yet to be determined. So this is the 3 CPRB members that are kind of serving right now. They're just kind of like helping to define scope of work, the purpose statement, and membership. They're not necessarily the people that are going to be representing us on the work group. Board Member Santos?
Yes, I did go back and listen to, in particular, the commission's comment, and I might mention I was particularly taken by your tenacity in trying to bring to ground what was being said by the commission. And after listening to it at least twice, I'm still not clear. And, it was clear to me that we don't have to go back and start all over again, but that we needed to make some effort to work within whatever this work group is called. So again, I'm still not clear. Has the city staff formed a work group, leadership group that are going to say, okay, here's the people who are going to serve on this, or do you know yet?
This is Chair Robinson. So no, it's still kind of in the this is what I'm calling it. I hope this is not too confusing. The pre-work group phase. So Jane, Tanya, Stephanie are working with city staff and chief of police to define membership right now. So that is still undefined. Citygate has outlined some recommendations. However, that's yet to be solidified.
And if I could, is there going to be an opportunity at some point in time for this group to vote on what we believe as a group should be the participation level with that group?
This is Chair Robinson. Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a conversation with all of us. No one's going to be volunteered for something without their consent, obviously. And yeah, it's going to be a conversation. Brandon, I don't know if I should interpret your hand movements as raising your hand.
Well, Madam Chair, this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, and if I may, so I do have a microphone that goes up and down, and so that's probably what you're seeing is me either putting it up or down. But I might just help to translate a little bit. Board Member Santos, what we're doing with the subcommittee of the board is essentially creating a project charter, and that project charter will lay out the purpose, the expectations, and the parameters around the scope of focus that the work group will get into. The next step will be to bring that project charter to the police review board and seek the board's feedback. And if the board is prepared to approve that project charter, then we would take that to the city commission in order to get their endorsement to make sure that we've scoped the work of the work group and we've composed the work group membership in a way that meets everybody's expectations. And we can start that work group with everybody having a very clear understanding of what it is that we're coming at the table to accomplish.
This is Chair Robinson. Any other comments or questions on this agenda item? Board Member Santos.
Board Member Santos, I do think with that information, I think my feeble mind understands where we're headed with it. So thank you.
All right, this is Chair Robinson. I don't think we need a vote on this for right now. Does that sound right? Thumbs up. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. And actually, Board Member Mishra, not to put you on the spot, but I know this was an agenda item that you brought up in our pre-meeting. So if you'd like to present it. Oh, you're muted.
So this is Board Member Mishra. Just a clarification. This is the question I asked about complaints.
Yes.
I presume?
Yes.
So as we were doing the meeting, one of the things I thought, and given how long we have served on this board, is to get a feel, periodically get a feel for how the interactions between the police and the community are being assessed. And one of the indicators for us is complaints. Is that fair to say? And so to that end, rather than wait for the end of the year to get some information, I thought once every quarter or once every 6 months would be a more timely sharing of information. Does that help?
This is Chair
Madam Chair?
Robinson. Yeah, so what you're looking for tonight is to maybe discuss how often we would receive reports about numbers of complaints received related to racial or other bias-based policing. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
And
so, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
So, sorry to interrupt. So this is Sanjay Mishra, board member. I was thinking of it from a business perspective, where you put out quarterly reports and say, this is what you have done in the last 3 months. So bring that regularity into the system so that end of the year, you don't find out that there were 35 complaints. So we should be not surprised.
Lieutenant David Ernst, if I may. I'm going to kind of maybe start a little bit from the beginning, but for those of you that have been on the board, if you recall, we do provide an annual report there in the end of June, which is ultimately then provided to the Attorney General's office. And I'm speaking to Mr. Santos here just because he's new to the board. And if you recall, it essentially, we would report out the date or when we receive a complaint, who investigated, which is almost always the Office of Professional Accountability, and then the disposition. Historically, in my time here of awareness, let's say, I don't want to say my time with the department, we've had, I think at most 2 complaints related to related to racial or other bias-based policing. In some years, we've had 0. I personally don't object to some sort of quarterly report, but sometimes dividing 1 or 2 into a quarter, we don't have much to work with. I did reach out to the Office of Professional Accountability, and I asked all the way back from what would be our current reporting year of July 1st of 2021 to now, and then but ultimately up to June 30th of this year. And we've had 1 complaint that was received in January of 2022. And that's the only one we've had reported so far.
Board Member Santos.
So, Board Member Santos, is there a mechanism currently in place that this person that filed a complaint in January of this year can say, I want the board to respond to my complaint, or is that not part of the process right now?
No, sir, that is part of the process. They're verbally notified when provided the disposition of the complaint. And then also they're also mailed a letter, which provides the process on how to appeal as well.
Okay.
And mind you, there's varying layers to this. One is we can have internally generated complaints, which of course then there's nobody that could appeal in the sense of because there's no external complainant. But also just to keep in mind too, some people might initially participate in the complaint process and then choose not to participate and or are unable to be getting a hold of after that. So while we try to notify them of appeal, it might not always be able to occur.
Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson, I just would like to, I think I might have understood Michael's question a little bit differently and wanted to clarify that we don't have access to the complaints until they're appealed. So only we would never see a complaint unless it were appealed.
Board Member Santos.
So maybe this is a question for Brandon. Is that because in some fashion the city believes it's not subject to the Open Records Act?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I think what we're doing is just following the process that's spelled out in the ordinance. And so the board is set up to receive appeals of the finding of an investigation of a complaint of racial or other bias-based policing.
And if I could, Board Member Santos, it just strikes me as the quintessential information that this board would want to know. Oh, yes, we had someone file a complaint, but it was either resolved to the extent that the complainant felt it was resolved or not, but at least the board knew there was this complaint and it was based upon this. That way we can tell, look, you continue to get complaints in this particular area. If we have no historical knowledge until someone appeals, we're really left with being in the dark.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Lieutenant Ernst, were you finished with your comments?
Essentially, yes. I would add, and I heard what Mr. Santos had said, and I recognize the information provided is limited, but we do report out to the board annually the number of racial or other bias-based policing complaints. And then we also have an annual report on our website, and I don't know exactly because what it's going to look like this year, referring to 2021's annual complaint report, so to speak. But we also report out on our overall complaints, but that is going to change a little bit because we have a new complaint management system, probably without a lack of a better way to explain it.
And this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I think we're saying the same thing, although I don't think it's clear. But I think it was our opinion, or the staff opinion, that this is a worthwhile request and something that we think would be a valuable report to provide to the board.
So this is Chair Robinson. Oh, Board Member Santos.
I would just say that I don't disagree with anything concerning this quarterly update, but still, is it the opinion of the members of this board that have been serving on the board that the current structure of the ordinance does not provide a mechanism for this board to see complaints filed against the police department based on racial complaints? Is that our current opinion of where we stand, that we just don't have the structure to enable us to see it?
Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. Michael, this is, yes, we agree that we do not have a mechanism in the existing ordinance that allows us to see anything other than appeals. And this is the reason, this is the primary reason that we revised that ordinance and have a proposal, a draft proposal that broadens our authority to be able to see the complaints for exactly the reason that you identified. We need to know what the patterns are. We need to know, we can't do anything to improve police community relations if we don't know what those relations look like. That's the bottom line for us.
And this is Chair Robinson. I think, it is a board consensus that we do need to have more, we need to have more access to those complaints. And again, like Board Member Gibson said, that's why we changed that in the draft ordinance. I think tonight I'd like to focus on how frequently we'd like to receive those updates. So quarterly was thrown out there. I know there's a low volume of these complaints. So do we think twice a year? Do we think quarterly? What are our thoughts as the board? Board Member Salvini.
Yes, I think quarterly reports would be fine. And again, those complaints are really racial biased and other biased complaints, correct? They're not general complaints.
This is Chair Robinson. Yes, that's what we're requesting.
Sorry, I forgot to say Board Member Salvini. Okay, just wanted to clarify, and I think quarterly would work for me.
Board Member Littleton.
Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I would suggest at minimum go only twice a year, given the fact I don't want to add extra work to Lieutenant Ernst or anybody else with the police department when we do know that's a very small number and it's going to probably remain as such until we if something had changed within our ordinance, that we would see more complaints, because it's just a low number. But I truly appreciate Sanjay's, reaching out for getting more information. But since it's maybe one or two, if that, I just don't want to add additional work to him quarterly. That's my 2 cents.
Chair Robinson, any other comments? So, Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. I'm going to support whatever the consensus of the board is on this. But from my point of view, the numbers don't mean very much. They don't tell us anything about the nature of the complaints. They're very limited to racial and bias-based complaints, which means that we miss a lot of complaints. So just to get, put that on the table, that I'm happy to have the reports of the numbers, but the numbers don't tell us very much. They don't tell us what we need to know about the relationship between the law enforcement and the community. Just my view.
Board Member Santos.
Along that line, Board Member Santos, I absolutely agree with whatever the group wants to do as far as frequency, but it strikes me that unless the staff, in particular the city attorney, tells us, look, we're not going to give this to you because it's not an open record, I personally could come in and get that document at any moment in time, whether I'm on this board or not. And it seems to me that what you really would say is the police department willing to simply tell us? I mean, if it's information that would be helpful to us, whether it's in the ordinance or not, just tell us.
This is Chair Robinson. Board Member Santos, can you clarify what information you're asking for? Are you asking for information on all complaints, or are you asking for information on racial or otherwise based policing complaints?
I'm sorry, I can't get my buttons right here, but I'm only talking about the current structure where my understanding is we get bias-based complaints. And all I'm saying is it seems like an artificial limitation to say, well, that person didn't appeal it. It's still important for this board to understand what was the nature of the complaint to begin with. And if that's not somehow limited by law, which I doubt that it is, why not just tell us? And that way we can be more informed as to where we think issues are going. So I'm not talking about expanded into non-bias-based complaints. I'm not saying that.
This is Chair Robinson. Thank you for clarifying. Board Member Littleton.
Thanks. This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I'm going to kind of stick my neck out here a little bit. I'm going to just read a part of what the draft of this purpose statement is, just to give you a little bit of insight of something that we talked about the complaints, just so you have some exposure to our thought process. And part of that has to do with, I'm just going to read some of this. Assess existing policies, procedures, systems, and other information relevant to the receipt and investigation of complaints against law enforcement officers and the Lawrence Police Department, and citizen oversight of that process. Just want to put this out there to those of you on this call that this is an important aspect that we're talking about. And it's a really important one. And we had a very in-depth conversation. And I think it's a good conversation that we've been having. And we're just one meeting into it. But just to give you, I wanted to give you some segue that we are really working on that piece of it. And Michael, I know you don't know a lot of the background. As Jane has alluded to, this has been a really important conversation that we actually have needed a long time once we get to the working group and to the stakeholders.
Chair Robinson, thank you for sharing that, Board Member Littleton. So, I do want to say, like, nothing we ask for is obviously going to be a perfect solution to what we're looking for. Just looking to kind of move the ball down the road a little bit. And I think definitely getting more frequent reporting on what the complaints are looking like, what the numbers are looking like. I think that would be helpful. I do agree with Stephanie that twice a year feels like a good number to me, but I'm definitely open to what other people are thinking. So any feedback on that? Board Member Salvini.
Board Member Salvini here, and I'm good with that too. I just started with quarterly thinking, well, let's just stay on top of it. But, you know, I recognize and acknowledge that these are low numbers, and I too share with Stephanie, if there's additional work that needs to be done to make this report, I certainly want to consider that.
This is Chair Robinson. If I could ask a question of Lieutenant Ernst. In this report, would we have any shareable details of the nature of the complaint, or would it just be a number of racial or other bias-based policing complaints?
I guess if you could assist me in defining what details you want. I recognize bringing the whole file for everyone to view would be ideal, but when you define details, and what we've typically reported out on is the date the complaint was received, the date complaint was closed, who investigated it, and then the status, what I want to say, the disposition of the investigation. We've had inquiries either from you or the media on certain ones where we've identified the protected class where the alleged bias was against, and that's the most detail I'm aware of having publicly released.
Thank you for that. This is Chair Robinson. I think that's what I was wondering about, if it could be identified as if it was a racial bias or economic bias or gender identity bias. I think that would be beneficial information for us to have if that's at all possible. And I understand, I don't know the extent of what could be shared, but, and I'm just speaking for myself here, but I think that might be useful information for us to have. Board Member Santos.
I think, and I haven't looked at it recently, but maybe Lieutenant Ernst knows, there's a requirement that these type of complaints be filed with the state. Is there not some categorization in that report? Or do you happen to know?
Lieutenant David Ernst, no, sir. And actually the details I just provided, absent the protected class, the alleged bias was against, it's a report that's annually and electronically submitted to the Attorney General's office. And you go through and identify the number of complaints and then provide the details I just gave of the beginning date, the end date, who investigated, and the disposition. And then there's about 4 questions that have to be answered, and I don't have them memorized off the top of my head. One, I think, is asked if you have a review board. Do you collect traffic data? There's one about the comprehensive plan, which you folks had a presentation on about a year ago. Or, well, maybe, I don't remember the exact time. And there's one other question I forget. So admittedly, it is a very basic form that's filled out. But it does not identify essentially much beyond that. It is a bias-based policing complaint.
Board Member Santos.
Board Member Santos, and perhaps the thing that would be most helpful is if the staff simply could determine what they can tell us in the context of our relationship. I mean, because I understand that if the press is asking for something, there are limitations, and so whether those limitations apply in the context of the board, I don't know, but I'm just trying to avoid having to wait until there's some change in the nature of the board or the ordinance that controls the board to see if we could get some more information.
This is Chair Robinson. Lieutenant Ernst, I don't want you to feel like we're putting you on the spot at all. If this is information that you need to bring back to our next visit, our next meeting, that's completely fine. Would it be possible for when we receive these reports that information is shared about the protected class of, is that the terminology you use, the protected class?
Yeah, yes. And even in the one I just reported to you here in January, yes, it would be possible. And the protected class was race in this instance. So yes, that would be possible.
Okay. This is Chair Robinson. Thank you. Thank you for answering all of our questions tonight. I really appreciate that. All right. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? Board Member Mishra?
So just that I always think about Brandon in these. Do we need the resolution, Brandon, to say we expect a report out every 6 months?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. What do you mean by a resolution? Or are you speaking about the ordinance? Does the ordinance?
A motion.
Oh, a motion. At this point, I would say, and I might ask Lieutenant Ernst to weigh in on this. If you would maybe give us a chance to, with this feedback, put a sort of a mock-up report together or an example using the one current complaint that is under investigation, and we can provide a draft report and hopefully do that by the next meeting. And Lieutenant Ernst, please jump in if that's too aggressive of a timeline. And that way you could see the report and what sort of information fields we're able to fill in for you. And then we can finish the discussion at that point with how frequently to submit this report.
Fair enough. Thank you, Brandon.
Board Member Littleton?
This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I don't know if this is the right platform to ask this, but I've been wanting to ask about make some suggestions to the police department's website regarding where the complaints are. I think our community engagement work group maybe worked on that at one time and did some updates. But I guess my question is, how best should I submit? Would that be to you, Jenny, or to Lieutenant Ernst maybe, and to Brandon? I have just a couple of simple suggestions to maybe make some improvements to it.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I would say anybody who has recommendations about website design, interface, things like that, feel free to submit those to myself, Chief Lockhart, Lieutenant Ernst, or any member of our team. Chief, jump in and redirect me if that's not consistent with your expectations, please.
Yeah, Chief Rich Lockhart. Stephanie, anything you want to submit regarding the police department, I'd prefer it come through my office. Okay. That way I can ensure that it gets to the correct person and we can get that addressed for you. So you got my email address, just shoot it there.
Yeah, they're pretty minor. But I looked at it, but okay, we'll do. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are helpful suggestions.
All right, this is Chair Robinson. So I've got noted before our next meeting, if possible, for Lieutenant Ernst or city staff to create a mock-up report of the January 2022 complaint, the racial or other bias-based complaint for the board. And then at that meeting, we'll also decide on the frequency of reporting from the police department on racial or other bias-based policing. Does that all sound accurate? Okay. All right, so I don't think we need a vote on that. Any other comments or questions before we move on? All right, so looks like we're to the last item on our agenda. it's going to be a hot button topic. This is something that Brandon brought up when I first came on as chair regarding moving the meeting time to 6:00 p.m. rather than 7:00. Not so that we could go an extra hour, but so that we could be finished at a reasonable time. Open for discussion. Board Member Littleton.
Board Member Stephanie Littleton, I am open for moving it to 6 p.m.
And Board Member Gibson, we don't need to hear from you, I don't think.
But wait, we do.
Board Member Gibson.
Yeah, Jane Gibson, you do need to hear from me.
Well, no, I know, I was joking. I
know. But my view is that 6:00 is fine, but I want us to finish at 8. I don't think more than a 2-hour meeting is necessary for the work that we do. And if we did have to extend, we could vote to extend, but I would vote for 6 as long as we're done by 8. If we shoot for 8.
This is Chair Robinson, I concur. Board Member Salvini, did you have your hand up?
I'm good with 6 too. And I would say never to go past 8. I'm with you, Jane, on that. And or we can meet the following week if we need to carry over, for sure.
Board Member Santos.
Board Member Santos, I hate to sound so much like the lawyer that I am, but I would ask to make sure that the public meeting law permits you to have a finite time on your meetings. And that's something Brandon can answer.
This is Chair Robinson. Brandon, would you like to speak to that?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. We do with the City Commission. There is a time limit. It's not in terms of hours. It's in terms of the time of the evening. And so the City Commission meets until I believe it's 10 o'clock. It might be 11 o'clock. And by the resolution that sets out the expectation and guidelines for the City Commission meetings, it states that those meetings will end by that time unless there is an item that is currently under discussion. And then they will go as long as it takes to complete discussion of that item, and then entertain a motion and take a vote to determine whether or not the meeting will be extended or end at that time. So we can establish a boundary like that, especially, and I do think it's a good idea to allow that option for the board to extend if that is desired. It could also be just a stated goal, stated expectation and a norm as opposed to a policy.
This is Chair Robinson. I kind of view it as a friendly shared goal to end by 8 o'clock. I think that it would be important to check with Marie before we finalize this, just to make sure there are no conflicts with her schedule. So would it be okay if I reached out to confirm with her that 6 o'clock would work for her, and then at our next meeting we could finalize that or move it up to 6 o'clock? Brandon, yes, thumbs up from everyone. Okay. So to clarify, I'll reach out to Marie. If 6 o'clock works for her, our next meeting will begin at 6 with the goal of ending by around 8 o'clock. Do we need a vote on that? Brandon, looking to you.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, I would ask for a vote, and I would also suggest allowing me to be the one to contact Board Member Taylor.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right.
And so I will make that contact and report out to the whole board through email.
Sounds good. Board Member Littleton.
This Board Member Stephanie Littleton, I do think it's a good idea that we might want to consider with this vote, adding the extension just in case if there's something and we're right at the 8 o'clock hour. So just to have that possibility, even though I know we want to end at 8.
This is Chair Robinson. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement. I think it would be good to have a check-in around 8 to see how everyone's doing. So yeah, I think that's a good safety to put in place for ourselves. Okay. Would anyone like to call for a motion to change our meeting start time? Board Member Santos?
Board Member Santos, I'd move to change the monthly meeting time from 7 o'clock to 6 o'clock, with the idea being that we all agree we'd like to be done by 8 and have the ability to extend if necessary.
Well said. Is there a second? Board Member Gibson?
Board Member Gibson, I second.
All right. And just to double check, since this is our only vote for the night, we don't have any public comment here. No. Okay. All right. This is Chair Robinson. We'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor indicate with a yay. All those opposed, nay. Board Member Santos.
Yay.
Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Mishra, yes.
Board Member Littleton.
Board Member Littleton, yes.
Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Gibson, yes.
Board Member Salvini.
Board Member Salvini, yay.
And Chair Robinson, yay. The vote passes with, sorry, I was trying to count how many people are here tonight. The vote passes with 6.
6-0.
Yeah, thank you. All right. That's all for tonight. Our next meeting is on March 10th. Oh, Board Member Santos.
Board Member Santos, I just wanted to thank Chief Lockhart for making the effort to chat with us individually. That was very kind and considerate, and I really appreciated it.
Chief Lockhart, you all are very welcome. Thank you for taking time. And Tanya, we're going to get you scheduled. So I think you are my last one.
All right. And this is Chair Robinson. Thank you to all of our city staff tonight for joining us. We've had some extras on tonight, so we really appreciate your time and your collaboration with us. All right. Take care.
All right. Thank you all.
Stay well.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
We do actually, majority of our board members. We need a motion to adjourn.
Well, I'd make the motion to adjourn, and whoever's left in the group, second, and we can move on.
There we go. I think that works.
We're in favor. We're good.
So I've got a motion from Board Member Santos, a second from Salvini, and if you would cast your vote, Santos.
Board Member Santos, aye.
Salvini.
Board Member Salvini, aye.
And Gibson.
Board Member Gibson, aye.
All right. The motion passes 3-0. Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good evening.